Captain Cirith Villani stood at the observation window of her dying ship and watched the stars mock her with their silence. The freighter Velis Grace had been drifting for 7 days now, powerless and broken in the emptiest stretch of space known to the galaxy. They called this region the Null Reach because nothing existed here. No stations, no patrol routes. No hope. Cirith pressed her 4 hands against the cold glass and felt the vibration of failing systems. Beneath her scaled fingers, she was Corvani, a species known throughout the galaxy as traders and merchants. Beings of calculation and careful planning, but no amount of calculation could have predicted the catastrophic failure of their FTL drive. The explosion that killed 2 of her crew instantly and left the rest trapped in a metal coffin floating between the stars behind her. She heard the soft clicking of claws on metal flooring. She did not need to turn around to know it was Pex, her young Milari navigator. His species were small and covered in soft gray fur, with large eyes that saw far more than most gave them credit for. "Captain," Pex said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I have completed the calculations you requested." Cirith finally turned to face him and saw the fear he was trying so hard to hide. "Tell me," she said. Pex looked down at the datapad in his trembling paws. "The Corveni trade fleet is approximately 20 standard cycles away even if they received our distress signal immediately," he said. "But our life support will fail in 18 cycles. Possibly less if the secondary systems continue to degrade." Cirith had known the answer before she asked, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way she'd been avoiding. "And the radiation leak?" she asked. "Contained to the lower decks for now," Pex replied. "But the containment seals were not designed for this level of damage. They will fail eventually." Eventually meant they would die slowly from radiation poisoning instead of quickly from lack of oxygen. Cirith was not sure which was worse. She walked past Pex toward the main corridor where the rest of her surviving crew had gathered. 12 souls remained on the Velis Grace. 12 lives that depended on her to find a way out of this, but there was no way out. The corridor was dim, emergency lighting casting everything in a sickly red glow. Her crew looked up as she approached, and she saw the same fear in their eyes that she had seen in Peck's 2 Dreth engineers sat against the wall, their heavy gray bodies slumped with exhaustion. They had worked without rest for days trying to repair the FTL drive. But some things could not be fixed with determination alone. The rest were Corvani, like herself. Merchants and cargo handlers who had signed on for a simple trade run and found themselves facing death in the void. "I will not give you false hope," Cirith said, her voice steady despite the despair clawing at her chest. "Our situation is dire, but we are not dead yet. I have sent distress signals on all frequencies, and they will continue to broadcast until our power fails." Completely, one of the Dreth engineers, a scarred veteran named Torv, let out a bitter laugh. "Who will answer?" "Captain," he asked, "we are in the Null Reach. No one comes here, no one patrols here. We might as well be screaming into a black hole." Cirith wanted to argue with him, but she could not because he was right. The Null Reach existed between galactic arms, a vast stretch of nothing that no civilization claimed because there was nothing worth claiming. Ships avoided it because help could not reach them if something went wrong, and something had gone very wrong. "Perhaps the hegemony," suggested Vela, a young Corvani barely past her coming of age. "They have the largest fleet. Surely they would help." Torv laughed again, harder this time. "The hegemony does not enter unclaimed space," he said. "It is not worth the fuel cost to rescue 12 traders. We are not profitable enough to save." Vela's scales flushed with shame, and she looked away. Cirith felt anger rise in her chest. Not at Torv for speaking the truth, but at the galaxy itself for being so cold. "What about the collective?" Pex asked quietly. "They have ships everywhere. The collective considers rescue operations to be an inefficient allocation of resources. Sirith replied. They would calculate that the cost of saving us exceeds our productive value, and they would leave us to die while expressing their regret in precisely calculated terms. Silence fell over the crew because every word she spoke was true. This was the way of the galaxy. Every species looked out for themselves first. Alliances existed for profit, and protection was a transaction. No one helped strangers for free, because helping strangers for free was illogical. Sirith remembered the first lesson her father had taught her about trading among the stars. Trust. No one who offers something for nothing because they always want something. She had lived by that lesson her entire life, and now she was gonna die by it. The days crawled past like wounded animals. Sirith rationed their remaining food and water until every meal became a careful calculation of survival. She watched her crew slowly lose hope, watched their eyes grow dull and their movements grow slow. On the 5th day, Vila began recording final messages to her family. By the 6th day, everyone was doing the same. Peck spent hours staring at the navigation console as if he could will a miracle into existence. Torv and the other Dreth engineers stopped speaking entirely. Sitting in silence with the weight of death pressing down on them, Sirith recorded her own message on the 7th day. She spoke to her sister and her young niece back home, telling them she was sorry she would not see them again. She told them she loved them, and that she had tried her best. When she finished, she sat alone in her quarters and allowed herself to cry for the first and last time. Then she wiped her eyes, straightened her uniform, and returned to the bridge to await the end. She was there when the sensors beeped. At first, she thought it was another malfunction because the sensors had been giving false readings for days. But then, Pex looked up from his console with an expression she did not recognize. "Captain," he said, his voice shaking, "I am detecting a ship signature." Sirith was at his side in an instant, her 4 hands gripping the console as she stared at the readings. It was real. A ship was approaching, but her hope turned to confusion as she studied the data. "This does not match any known registry," she said. "The vessel identifier is unknown." Before Pex could respond, the communication system crackled to life with a transmission. The language was strange and rough, and their translators struggled to parse it for several long seconds. Then the words became clear, and Sirith felt something she had forgotten how to feel. "This is the UN Resolute," the voice said, strong and calm and impossibly present. "We have received your distress signal. Hold position. We are en route." Pex looked at her with wide eyes. "UN," he whispered. "I do not know that designation." Sirith did not know it either, but she knew the only species young enough and foolish enough to be out here in the null reach where no sensible civilization would travel. Humans. She breathed, and for the first time in 7 days, she felt something other than despair. The human ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel so close to the Veliath's grace that Sirith was certain they were about to collide. She grabbed the edge of her console and braced for impact. But the impact never came. The human vessel simply appeared beside them, close enough that she could see individual hull plates through the observation window. "That is impossible," Torv said from behind her, his voice filled with disbelief. "No species performs FTL emergence at that distance. The gravitational interference alone should have torn them apart. But the humans had done it anyway." Sirith stared at the ship now holding position beside them. It was smaller than she expected, compact and angular, with none of the elegant curves that Corvani shipbuilders favored. The vessel bristled with weapons in a way that made its purpose very clear. This was not a merchant ship or an exploration vessel. This was a warship. The communication system crackled again, and the same calm Voice from before filled the bridge. Veloth's Grace. This is Commander James Chun of the UEN Resolute. We are reading significant damage to your vessel and detecting radiation signatures. Please advise on your status and the nature of assistance you require. Sirith hesitated for just a moment. Everything she knew about humans came from warnings and rumors. They were a young species, barely 2 centuries into space travel. Yet they built warships and pushed into territories. They had no right to enter the hegemony. Called them dangerously unpredictable, the collective, and calculated their expansion rate and expressed concern about their long-term intentions. Most older species dismissed humans as aggressive primitives who would burn themselves out within a few generations, and now one of their warships had found. As she thought about the transaction that would follow, because there was always a transaction, the humans would want something in return for their help. Perhaps trade agreements or political favors or access to Corvani shipping routes. Rescue was never free, and she wondered what price they would demand. She activated her communication system, Commander Chun. "This is Captain Sirith Vellani," she said. "Our FTL drive has failed catastrophically. We have radiation leaking into our lower decks, and our life support will fail within 11 cycles. We have 12 crew members in need of assistance." There was a brief pause, and then Chun's voice returned. "Understood, Captain. We are dispatching engineering and medical teams to your vessel immediately. Please stand by to receive boarding parties through your main airlock." Sirith blinked in surprise. "Commander," she said carefully, "we should discuss terms before any assistance is rendered. My authority to negotiate on behalf of the Corvani Trade Council is limited, but I am certain we can reach an acceptable arrangement." The pause that followed was longer this time. "Captain Vellani," Chun said, and his voice carried something she could not quite identify. "There are no terms. You sent a distress signal and we answered. That is all there is to it. Now please open your airlock so my people can start helping yours." Sirith did not know how to respond to that. In her entire career as a trader and captain, she had never encountered a species that offered help without expecting something in return. She looked at Pax, who shrugged with equal confusion. "Open the airlock," she said finally. The first humans came aboard 10 minutes later, and Sirith was struck by how small they were. She had expected a warrior species to be large and imposing, but the humans barely reached her shoulder. They moved in bulky environmental suits that made them look even stranger. Their faces visible through transparent helmets, the one in front removed her helmet and revealed a face that Sirith's translators identified as female. She had dark hair pulled back tightly and eyes that swept across the damaged corridor with sharp assessment. "Captain Vellani," the woman said, extending one of her 2 hands in what Sirith recognized as a human greeting gesture. "I am Chief Engineer Maria Santos. Point me at your biggest problem and let us get to work." Sirith found herself taking the offered hand and shaking it, as she had red humans preferred. "The radiation leak in the lower decks is our most immediate concern," she said. "Our containment seals are failing." Santos nodded briskly and turned to the team of engineers behind her. "Rodriguez, Kim, you are on radiation duty. I want that leak sealed in 2 hours. The rest of you, spread out and assess damage. I want a full report on what we are working with." The humans scattered through the ship with a speed and purpose that left Sirith momentarily speechless. They did not wait for approval or ask for guidance. They simply began working as if saving her crew was the most natural thing in the world. More humans arrived in the following hour. A medical team set up in the main cargo bay, treating injuries that the Corvani had been forced to manage with inadequate supplies. Sirith watched a young human male approach one of her injured crew members, a Corvani named Resk, who had suffered burns during the initial explosion. the human medic examined Resk with gentle hands, despite obviously having no familiarity with Corvani physiology. I do not know your species, the medic admitted, looking at Resk with genuine concern, but pain looks the same in every face I have ever seen. Tell me where it hurts, and we will figure out the rest together. Resk stared at the human for a long moment. Before pointing to his injured arm, the medic smiled and began working, asking questions and adjusting his approach based on Resk's responses. Cirith turned away from the scene and found Peck standing beside her, watching the humans with an expression of wonder. They are so strange, Peck said quietly. I asked one of them why they came for us, and she looked at me like I had asked why water is wet. She said they came because we needed help. As if that explained everything. Cirith did not have an answer for him. Chief Engineer Santos found her an hour later, her suit covered in grime and her face shining with sweat. Good news and bad news, Captain, Santos said. The good news is we have sealed the radiation leak and your life support is stable for now. The bad news is your FTL drive is completely destroyed. You are not going anywhere on your own power. Cirith felt her heart sink. Then we are still stranded, she said. Santa shook her head. Not stranded. Just stuck for the moment. We can tow you to the nearest station, or you can transfer your crew to the Resolute until a proper repair ship can reach you. Either way, you are not dying out here. I did not patch your ship together just to watch you give up. The human grinned, and Cirith found herself almost smiling. In return, this was not how rescue was supposed to work. There should be negotiations and contracts, and carefully calculated exchanges instead. There was a human engineer covered in grease, grinning at her like saving lives was something she did every day. Before breakfast, Commander Chun's voice came through the ship's communication system, interrupting her thoughts. Captain Villani, we have a situation. Our sensors are detecting 3 vessels approaching your position at high speed. Configuration suggests Vrakith raiders. Cirith felt the blood drain from her face. The Vrakith were scavengers and slavers who preyed on the weak and vulnerable. They must have detected her distress signal and come hunting. Commander, she said, her voice tight with fear. The Vrakith will not negotiate. They will take my crew as slaves and strip my ship for salvage. There was a brief pause before Chum responded. That is not going to happen. Captain, I need you to start transferring your crew to the Resolute immediately. We will handle the Vrakith. Cirith wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him that one small warship could not stand against 3 raider vessels. But something in his voice stopped her. It was not arrogance or bravado. It was certainty. The calm certainty of someone who had made a decision and would not be moved from it. We will handle this, Chen said again, and somehow Cirith believed him. The Vrakith ships emerged from faster-than-light travel in a triangular formation designed to intimidate and surround. Each vessel was twice the size of the Resolute, built for violence and cruelty, with hulls decorated in the bones of previous victims. Cirith had heard stories about the Vrakith. Her entire life, they were a species that had abandoned civilization in favor of predation, raiding the weak and selling captives to the highest bidder to them. A crippled freighter and a single small warship were not threats. They were opportunities. The Corvani crew had been transferred to the Resolute as quickly as possible, squeezed into corridors and spare compartments. Alongside human crew members who made room without complaints, Cirith stood on the human bridge now. Watching the tactical display with growing dread, Commander Chun sat in his chair at the center of the bridge. His posture relaxed despite the approaching danger. He was not a large man by human standards, with graying hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of many years spent making difficult decisions, but there was something in the way he held himself that made Cirith think he had seen situations like this before. The communication system crackled and a harsh voice filled the bridge. Human vessel. This is Commander Kreth of the Wraith Hunting Pack. You are interfering with legitimate salvage operations. Withdraw immediately, and we will allow you to leave with your lives. The Corvani freighter and its cargo belong to us now. Cirith felt her scales tighten. With fear, she looked at Commander Chun and waited for him to accept the offer. It was the logical choice after all. One ship against 3 was suicide, and the humans had no obligation to die for strangers they had only met. Hours ago, Commander Chun leaned forward in his sus chair and activated the communication system. Commander Kreth, he said, his voice calm and steady. The people on that freighter called for help, and we answered. That makes them our responsibility. You have 60 seconds to change course, or we will interpret your approach as hostile intent and respond accordingly. Cirith stared at him in disbelief. Was he insane? The Wraith had 3 ships and overwhelming firepower, and he was threatening them like he held all the advantages. Laughter erupted from the communication system, harsh and mocking. You threaten us, little human, Kreth said. Your species has been in space for barely 200 years, and you dare to stand against the Wraith. We have been hunting the weak since before your ancestors crawled out of whatever mud pit spawned them. Commander Chun did not respond to the insult. He simply looked at the tactical officer and said, "Begin countdown." The bridge of the Resolute transformed in that moment. Every human at every station seemed to sharpen, their casual demeanor replaced by focused intensity. Cirith watched them work and realized with growing amazement that they had been prepared for this from the moment they detected the Wraith. They had hoped for peace, but they had planned for war. 30 seconds. The tactical officer announced. The Wraith ships continued their approach. Confident in their superiority, Kreth was still laughing over the open channel, mocking the tiny human ship and its foolish commander. 15 seconds, Commander. Chun stood from his chair and walked to the main viewport, looking out at the approaching enemy with an expression Cirith could not read. 5 seconds. Chun turned back to his crew and nodded once, weapons free. The Resolute opened fire. Cirith had never seen a ship fight the way the humans fought. The Resolute did not hold position and exchange volleys like civilized vessels were supposed to do. Instead, it lunged forward, accelerating directly toward the enemy formation in a move that should have been suicidal. The Wraith weapons' fire tore through the space where the Resolute had been moments before. But the human ship was no longer there. It twisted and rolled through the void, firing constantly, targeting the lead Wraith ship with a ferocity that seemed almost personal. Direct hit on enemy Vessel 1. The tactical officer reported. Their forward shields are failing. The Resolute took a hit to its port side, and the ship shuddered violently. Cirith grabbed a console to steady herself and watched sparks fly from a damaged panel. A human crew member was thrown from her station, blood flowing from a wound on her forehead. But she pulled herself up and returned to her post without a word. Commander Chun had been knocked against the viewport, but he simply straightened and continued issuing orders. Focus fire on Vessel 1. I want it dead before the others can coordinate. The Resolute poured everything it had into the lead Wraith ship. Missiles and energy weapons hammered at the raider, until its shields collapsed and its hull began to rupture. Secondary explosions tore through the enemy vessel as ammunition and fuel ignited. The Wraith ship broke apart in a bloom of fire and debris. Vessel 1 destroyed, the tactical officer announced. But the battle was not over. The 2 remaining Wraith ships recovered from their initial shock and began coordinated assault on the Resolute. The human ship was hit again and again. Damage reports flooding the bridge as systems failed and crew members fell. Cirith watched Commander Chun take a piece of shrapnel to the head, blood streaming down his face as he staggered against his chair. She expected him to fall, expected the humans to break and run, but Chun simply wiped the blood from his eyes and kept fighting engineering. "I need more power to forward weapons," he commanded, his voice steady despite his wound. "Hell, bring us around for another pass. Target their engines." The Resolute fought like a wounded animal. Desperate and deadly, it took damage that should have crippled it. Lost crew members, whose stations were manned by their surviving comrades moments later. The humans did not surrender. They did not retreat. They did not even seem to consider it as an option. Pex stood beside Sirith on the bridge. Watching the battle with wide eyes, a human woman stood near them, one arm hanging useless at her side, blood staining her uniform. "Why?" Pex whispered. "Why are you doing this? You could have left. You could have let them take us. Why are you dying for strangers?" The woman looked at him with an expression that mixed pain and something that might have been pride. "Because you needed help," she said simply. "That is enough." The second Vrakith ship fell to the Resolute's relentless assault, its engines destroyed by precision strikes that left it drifting and powerless. The third ship, seeing its packmates destroyed and crippled, attempted to flee. It never made it. Commander Chun gave the order and the Resolute pursued, damaged and bleeding but unwilling to let a single predator escape. The final Vrakith ship died in a flash of light as its reactor was breached by human weapons. Silence fell over the bridge. The battle was over. The Resolute drifted among the wreckage of 3 ships that had thought they were hunters and discovered too late that they were prey. Commander Chun stood at the viewport, his face covered in blood, his ship battered and broken around him. But he was alive, and so was his crew, and so were the Corvani they had come to save. He activated the communication system, and his voice was tired, but steady. "Captain Villani, the threat has been neutralized. Now let us finish fixing your ship." Sirith found that she could not speak. She could only stare at this strange human. This small, fragile creature, who had just killed 3 ships of murderers and pirates to protect people he had never met. She had lived her entire life believing that the galaxy was cold and transactional. She was beginning to think she had been wrong. The hours after the battle were filled with the grim work of survival. The Resolute had won its fight against the Vrakith, but victory had come at a terrible cost. 3 human crew members had died during the battle, and 7 more were wounded badly enough to require constant medical attention. Sirith walked through the corridors of the human ship and saw the aftermath everywhere she looked. Scorch marks on the walls where fires had been extinguished, panels hastily welded back into place by engineers who had worked through the battle without pause, blood stains that had been cleaned but not entirely erased. The humans moved around her like ghosts, exhausted but still working, still checking systems and tending to the wounded and keeping their damaged ship alive. She found herself in the ship's mess hall, where her own crew had been gathered along with off-duty human personnel. The room was crowded and uncomfortable, designed for far fewer people than it now held. But no one complained. A human cook was preparing food for everyone. Corvani and Dreth, and Milari and human alike, working with limited supplies to create something that would fill empty stomachs. Sirith watched a human ensign share his ration pack with Vila, showing the young Corvani how to open the strange containers and explaining what each item was. Vila listened with wide eyes, her earlier terror slowly being replaced by wonder. At the far end of the room, she spotted Pex sitting with the human medic who had treated the wounded during the battle. The young man's name was David. She had learned, and he was teaching Pex some kind of game involving small illustrated cards. Pex was laughing, actually laughing, and Sirith realized she had not heard that sound since before the disaster. She approached Commander Chun's quarters and hesitated. Before pressing the signal button, the door opened to reveal the commander sitting at a small desk, his head wrapped in bandages. Reading reports on a datapad, Captain Villani, he said, gesturing for her to enter. Please sit down. I apologize for the cramped quarters. This ship was not designed for guests. Cirith lowered herself onto a small chair that was clearly meant for human proportions. Her larger Corvani frame made the furniture groan in protest, but it held Commander Chen, she began, then stopped because she did not know how to say what she needed to say. He waited patiently, his eyes kind, despite the obvious exhaustion behind them. I have been a trader for 30 years, Cirith said finally. I have dealt with every species in the galaxy. I have negotiated contracts and resolved disputes and learned the ways of interstellar commerce. And I have never, not once in all those years, encountered anything like what you have done. Chen set down his datapad and gave her his full attention. What do you mean? He asked. You saved us, Cirith said. You answered our distress call without hesitation. You sent your people onto a dying ship to help strangers. You fought 3 enemy vessels and lost crew members to protect people you had never met. And you have asked for nothing in return. She leaned forward, all 4 of her hands pressed against her knees. Why? She demanded. The galaxy does not work this way. Rescue is a transaction. Protection is a commodity. No one helps strangers for free, because helping strangers for free is illogical and costly and dangerous. So why did you do it? Commander Chen was quiet for a long moment when he finally spoke. His voice was soft and thoughtful. Captain, do you know much about Earth? About human history? Cirith shook her head. Only rumors and warnings. She admitted. Chen nodded slowly and leaned back in his chair. We have a complicated history, he said. For most of it, we were terrible to each other. We fought wars over land and resources and ideas. We watched our neighbors suffer and did nothing because helping them was not in our interest. We let children starve while others hoarded wealth. We turned away refugees because they were different or inconvenient. His voice grew heavier with each word. We are not a naturally good species. Captain, our instincts push us towards selfishness and tribalism and fear of the other. For thousands of years we gave in to those instincts and caused unimaginable suffering. Cirith did not understand where this was going. If humans were as cruel as he described, why had they saved her? Chen continued before she could ask. But we also learned, he said. Slowly, painfully, with countless failures along the way. We learned that our worst impulses led to our greatest tragedies. We looked at the times we failed to help each other, and we felt shame. We looked at the times we did help, when we extended hands to strangers and pulled them out of the darkness, and we felt pride. He met her eyes with an intensity that made her scales prickle. When someone is drowning, you do not ask for their credentials before throwing them a rope, he said. When someone is starving, you do not demand payment before sharing your bread. When someone is calling out for help in the void, you answer, not because you will profit from it, not because they can give you something in return, but because that is who you want to be. Cirith felt something shift in her chest. Something she could not name. The galaxy thinks we are young and foolish, Chen said with a small smile. Perhaps we are. But we spent millennia learning hard lessons about what happens when you let fear and calculation override compassion. We are trying to be better than we were. Captain, helping you was not charity. It was us living up to the people we want to become. Silence stretched between them as Cirith processed his words in the Corvani Trade Council. In the hegemony, in the collective, everything was measured by value and profit and strategic advantage. The idea that a species would choose to help strangers simply because it was right, because of lessons learned from ancient mistakes, was so foreign to her that she struggled to accept it, and yet she had seen it with her own eyes. She had watched humans bleed and die for her crew without asking for anything in return. Your People who died, she said quietly. They had families, loved ones who will grieve for them. Yes, Chun said. And grief flickered across his face. They did. How do you bear it? Sirith asked. How do you sacrifice your own people for strangers and live with the cost? Chun was quiet again for a long moment. We hold a memorial, he said finally. We honor them, we remember them, we carry their names with us. And we make their sacrifice mean something by continuing to be the people they died believing in. He stood and walked to a small shelf where 3 objects rested. Sirith recognized them as personal items. Human photographs and tokens, Lieutenant Sarah Park, Chun said, touching one of the photographs. Ensign Marcus Webb. Petty Officer 3rd Class Jonas Kim. They knew the risks when they joined. They knew that one day they might be called to give everything for people they had never met. And they did it anyway. His voice broke slightly, but he continued. That is who we are. Captain, or at least who we are trying to be. We run toward the fire because someone has to. Because the galaxy is cold and dark and full of predators. And if no one stands up for the helpless, then the darkness wins. He turned back to face her. You asked me why we helped you. That is your answer. Because you needed help. Because we could provide it. Because letting you die when we had the power to save you would have been a betrayal of everything we are trying to become. Sirith rose from her chair. I do not know how to repay a debt like this, she said. Chun smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked genuinely at peace. There is no debt, he said. But if you really want to do something, then the next time you see someone who needs help, help them, pass it on. That is all we ask. Sirith left his quarters with his words echoing in her mind. She had come to the stars believing she understood how the galaxy worked. She was beginning to realize she had understood nothing at all. The Velitha's Grace limped into Corvani space 3 weeks after its rescue, towed by the damaged but functional Resolute until a proper repair vessel could meet them halfway. Commander Chun and his crew had stayed with them the entire journey, refusing to leave until they were certain the Corvani would make it home safely when the ships finally parted ways. Sirith stood at her viewport and watched the human warship turn back toward their own territory. She raised one hand in a gesture of farewell that she knew the humans could not see, and whispered a promise that she intended to keep. The Corvani Trade Council summoned her to a formal debriefing within days of her return. She stood in a grand chamber before 12 council members, the most powerful merchants and politicians in Corvani space, and told them everything that had happened. They listened with skepticism that grew with every word. You expect us to believe, said Council Elder Varath, an ancient Corvani whose scales had faded to pale gray, that these humans fought 3 Vracath raiders and asked for nothing in return. Not trade agreements, not political concessions, not even acknowledgement. I expect you to believe the truth, Sirith replied. Because it is what happened. The humans have a reputation, said another council member, a younger male named Sorik. The hegemony warns that they are aggressive and expansionist. The collective has calculated that their growth rate poses a long-term threat to galactic stability. These are not the actions of a benevolent species. Sirith felt her temper flare, but she controlled it. I have heard the warnings, she said. I believed them myself before the Resolute answered my distress call. But I have seen with my own eyes what humans are capable of when they choose to help rather than harm. She stepped forward and placed objects on the table before the council, a human multi-tool that Chief Engineer Santos had given to Torv, medical supplies that the human medic David had left for their injured crew, a data crystal containing the battle, recordings that showed everything the Resolute had done to save them. These are not the gifts of conquerors, Sirith said. These are the offerings of allies, of people who saw strangers in need and chose to help without thought of reward. Aldervereth examined the objects with uncertain hands. Even if what you say is true, he said slowly, it changes nothing about galactic politics. The humans are still young, still unpredictable. One act of kindness does not erase the concerns that the greater powers have raised. Cirith shook her head. With respect, Elder, I think it changes everything. For generations, we have operated under the assumption that every species acts only in its own interest. We have built our entire civilization around the idea that help must be purchased and protection must be earned. And then a human warship appeared in the null reach and proved that assumption wrong. She looked at each council member in turn. The hegemony calls them dangerous. But they did not use their strength to threaten us. The collective calls them inefficient. But they did not calculate the cost of saving us before acting. They came because we needed help. That was their only reason. That was enough. The council chamber was silent. Cirith continued, her voice growing stronger. I am not asking you to form an alliance with humanity or to declare them our greatest friends. I am asking you to consider the possibility that we have been wrong about them. I am asking you to recognize that a species capable of such selfless courage might be exactly what this galaxy needs. Her report was filed and distributed through official channels, but it did not stay contained within those channels. Traders talked. Merchants gossiped, and the story of the Resolute spread through the starlands like fire through dry grass. Other stories began to surface. A Dreth mining vessel that had been rescued by a human. Patrol ship after a collision with an asteroid, a Malari refugee convoy that had been escorted to safety by human warships when pirates threatened. A hegemony diplomat whose shuttle had been retrieved from a decaying orbit by a human crew who asked for nothing but a handshake in return. Each story was small on its own, but together they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. The humans did not help others to gain advantage. They helped because helping was what they believed in. The galaxy's perception of humanity began to shift. It was slow at first. A gradual change in how people spoke about the young species from the distant arm. The warnings from the hegemony and the collective remained, but they were met with growing skepticism from those who had experienced human kindness firsthand. A phrase began circulating among traders and travelers and the vulnerable of the galaxy. If you are in trouble, pray for a human ship. Years passed. Pax grew from a frightened young navigator into an experienced officer who served on one of the first joint Corvani human trading vessels. He told the story of the Resolute to every young crew member who would listen, and he showed them a worn human playing card that David had given him as a parting gift. David still sent him messages from across the galaxy, sharing news of his adventures and asking about Corvani culture and customs. They had become friends across the vast distances of space, connected by a moment of crisis that had revealed the best of both their species. Cirith rose through the ranks of Corvani society, her reputation enhanced by her relationship with humanity. She became a diplomat, then an ambassador, speaking for her people in the great councils of the galaxy. She never forgot what the Resolute had taught her. She carried Commander Chun's words with her wherever she went, and she tried to live by them, pass it on. He had said, help someone who needs it, and then ask them to do the same. It was a philosophy so simple that it seemed almost naive. Yet Cirith had seen its power. She had watched it transform enemies into allies and skeptics into believers. She had watched it create connections where none had existed, and heal wounds that had seemed permanent. The day came when humanity finally earned a seat at the Galactic Council, the great assembly where the major powers of the galaxy met to debate and decide the future. Many had opposed their inclusion, arguing that they were too young, too aggressive, too unpredictable, but enough voices spoke in their favor. Enough stories had spread, enough minds had been changed. Cirith was asked to speak on the day of humanity's formal induction, She stood before representatives of 100 species and looked out at a sea of alien faces that had once seemed so cold and calculating to her. "You ask what makes humanity worthy of a seat at this table," she said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. "I will tell you." She paused and thought of a wounded warship, a calm commander covered in blood, a young medic teaching card games to a frightened navigator. "They are the species that runs toward the fire," she said. "When others calculate the cost and decide it is too high, humans charge ahead anyway. When others look at strangers in distress and see nothing but liability, humans see people worth saving. When the darkness of the void closes in and hope fades to nothing, humans light a torch and hold it high." She felt her voice grow thick with emotion, but she continued, "I know this because I was saved by them. My crew was saved by them. We were dying in the emptiest stretch of space known to the galaxy, and a human warship answered our call without hesitation." She looked directly at the human delegation, at the descendants of the species that had once seemed so strange and frightening to her, in a galaxy that too often looks away. Sirith said, "Humanity chooses to look toward those in need. That is the rarest gift of all, and it is why they belong here among us." The chamber erupted in debate and discussion. But Sirith did not stay to listen. She had said what she came to say. She walked out of the great hall and found a quiet observation deck where she could watch the stars. Somewhere out there, the Resolute was still flying, still answering distress calls, still running toward the fire, and because of them, the galaxy would never be quite so cold again. Sirith smiled and whispered a final thank you to the void. Then she turned and walked back to her duties, carrying the torch that the humans had lit and determined to never let it go out.